Carnage. William was in a rage. It was the greatest battle he had ever taken part in. With each step he took some life fading away. Like a tornado he brought destruction in his way. So many warriors bravely tried to stop him, but it was in vain. He was driven by animalistic instincts and his strength and agility were cruel. The carnage has begun. The other Lycans were powerful, but William could influence the entire battlefield on his own. Every cut he was given was healed for his regeneration on its own, but he fed while fighting and the blood he ingested from his victims strengthened him every second the fight lasted. The greatest horror was that arrows crashed into his body and fell without wounding. His skin was very hard, only powerful blows could hurt him. The other Lycans, even if they were strong, were much more susceptible to injury. The bodies of many of them were full of wounds, but in a place full of healing elixir, it was very difficult for those wounds to remain for some time. Only a few bites and their bodies were already ready for some more blows. William moved swiftly across the battlefield, and with each blow his own, one body became two, and they were mercilessly torn. His beautiful white fur was now stained by all the blood that tinged him. The Dothraki needed to split into groups of 5 in a place with some space to have a chance against a Lycan Tier 1, but they didn't have the chance. In seconds they were besieged by several Lycans. Their destinies were one, it was destiny to be massacred. One thing had to be said, even if Dothraki were a cruel people they were good warriors and no doubt brave. They faced the Lycans without trembling. Even when they were face to face with certain death, they continued to fight. It was a shame they didn't stand a chance. The fighting slaves did not have the same resistance. If a swing of William's arm could destroy a Dothraki warrior, a swing of his arm could destroy a squadron of 10 of those slaves. The fight dragged on for an hour. In the end, only Lycans were standing on the battlefield. Unlike other warriors, the Lycans used to have prisoners of war. Those defeated ended up being an offering to them. After the battle it was time for the beasts to feed. The advantages of a Lycan were undoubtedly monstrous, but what impacted most to be excellent soldiers, besides the obvious advantages, was that they could recover quickly. In a few moments their bodies would return to the perfect state of before. Another important point to note was about morale. Lycans were born for combat. After the fights they were very excited. Perhaps in a short time little Lycans would be born. Some Lycans who were lucky could fulfill their wishes with their girlfriends and wives, others with bad luck, not. And at that moment, many Lycans could only howl at the moon, or run for a bath and then run to some brothel. Of course, not everyone thought so. Many were anxious to use these female slaves, but they knew that their lord would not allow them to do so. They could only look with water in their mouth. The female slaves were terrified, but when they saw many of these monsters turning into humans, the fear was lessened. Even if it was frightening to know that normal people could turn such things, it was much better than being surrounded by monsters. They were devastated, but they were already used to their disastrous destinies, and when they saw the look of those men they thought they would soon be back to the old routine. But to their surprise these men did nothing but stare at them and then their eyes turned in one direction and bowed their heads in submission. In the direction they turned a huge white monster was coming. The body of this monster was covered with blood, but even so its body was extremely majestic. Fear took over their hearts again, but they knew that it was a powerful human that was inside that creature and it made their hearts relax. All the monsters showed submission to this being. They were not surprised by this. This monster was much bigger than any other and furthermore it exhaled an air of supremacy. It was as if it was born to be a lord. Possibly it was a very tall man too. Slowly William began to return to his human form. He was able to perceive that from the look of dread of the women slaves, he passed to surprise and then anxiety. They looked at the monster as a man, but he was just a boy and to their surprise, he was handsome. Their eyes tried to keep every memory they had of him. They tried to record the image of this naked god in their minds. The blood that flowed through his body through the glow of the full moon gave him a special charm, a lethal attraction. When they breathed the air that passed through his body they no longer smelled the pungent smell of blood, they only felt the desire to grab him. And then their anxious eyes went to search the gift that this being possessed. It should be glorious too, no. And then the anxiety took hold of their little hearts. He had a huge gift. They wanted to know if they would hold on. Wasn't that a little too absurdly huge? Hi guys, laughing face. I used a new translation aid. Did you see any changes? Remember, if you want to read in Portuguese, look for my nick in the Wattpad site. Relembrando, caso queira ler em Português, procure meu nick no site, Wattpad. IngloriusEnd creators' thoughts. 36 comments 0 vote. Blood and rewards. This battle turned out to be a complete victory. Many Lycans had been wounded, but after the battle, everyone was healed. But unfortunately, some would not continue to walk with their brothers and sisters. 9 of them had fallen into traps and were vulnerable enough to be killed. When this information was reported to William, he was a little surprised. It was naive to think that the Lycans would not die or that they were unbeatable, that they could be killed like any other being, only it was more complicated to fight them. But even then it was impossible to say it was a memorable victory. The advantage of the surprise night battle proved to be gigantic for his race, probably only after a long time. Tactics made to deal with his people were elaborated. Until then, he should make the most of the situation. Several plans were emerging in William's mind. He was ready to initiate some of the most daring. But for everything to work out, he needed to increase his army, and only this current number would not be able to support his future actions. One of the Lycans came to notify us that the Dothrakis had stored a great deal of gold and jewelry, lots of food, and some stone jewelry that they didn't know what it was, but it seemed expensive because they were inside ornate boxes that were already very valuable. William's heart took a small leap. Maybe, just maybe, he had hit the jackpot. Walking toward the Dothraki's warehouse, he had realized that his men surrounded the area where the women slaves were staying, not allowing any to escape. William was not afraid that any Lycan would commit any crime. They were made to follow him faithfully. Even when they had to go against their twisted instincts, they would eventually bow to the will of their lord. And their lord had given them some orders. Some laws had been created for their kind. These rules tried to civilize these people in some way. By carelessness they might become more barbaric, and more uncivilized, for by nature the Lycans were more likely to be dominated by their instincts, so the rules should be vigorous. At that time one of the great laws had been activated, that is, the prohibition of any form of sexual violence at any time. Such acts were prohibited both for life in their societies and when they were at war. This great law not only aimed to protect against one of the acts that society saw as the most abominable, it also focused on bringing to their newborn race a good stigma. When they fought against others, they would not be like the savage Dothraki. To his surprise, when he arrived there, he received the account that more than 60 of the women slaves had committed suicide for fear of being devoured alive by the Lycans. He ended up feeling bad for this information. They were senseless deaths. He was there besides destroying these Dothrakis, freeing these poor people. But in any case, it was impossible to prevent some misunderstandings from happening. They would inevitably occur. William told these women slaves that they were free now, that they could follow their lives as they wished, but if they accepted, he could give them a new life and a place to live. In conversation with them, he explained the pros and cons, should they accept, and also explained that no harm would be done against them if they did not want it. To William's surprise, however, there was not one among the 389 slaves who refused this option. In a second the majority of the Lycan people went from one gender to the other in a more pronounced way. Out of curiosity he questioned what their motives were, and the answers were many, from just wishing they could, others because they wanted to be something more, and for some they just wanted to stay close to him. After turning them into Lycans, William out of curiosity entered the minds of some of them. He felt abused, the things they wanted to do with him. They felt a form of passion for him that was very wild, very physical, but also had a strong respect and admiration. They longed for him. They wanted him so much that they willingly chose to follow him. They were like crazy fans who followed their idols anyway, and if they could do some dirty things with them. These feelings were accentuated when they became Lycan, but it was still surprising to him this burning passion. The reason for accentuating this feeling by being transformed into Lycan was simple. The Lycan society was a society of admiration for the strong. A Lycan woman ended up choosing among those she liked the strongest. Of course this occurs most of the time. It does not mean that it always happens, but it was already possible to say that it was one of the emerging aspects of Lycan culture. Lycan men targeted women with wider hips. Even if it was an aspect of many cultures, this greater attraction to women with wider hips, for Lycans it was accentuated by their greater proximity to me as an animal part. William knew things were going well, but he also knew that he was getting more complex with each passing moment. With the new addition to his breed, William quickly needed to expand his food stocks. It would become more difficult to hide from Emily his interactions with strange people, but it was impossible for him just to finance the feeding of those people. It was time for the Lycas to have a place to call home. It was time to begin the execution of the plan to conquer Lorith. 31 comments 0 vote. Silent conquest. It had been a week since William's fateful night when he managed not only to expand the number of Lycans alive but also to get a little richer, but the focus in those days was on making room for all those people. William's first plan was to get people out of town and start creating a place for them far away, but then a sudden thought arose. Why not take advantage of it to make his strength grow within the city itself? In a way that if he wanted to conquer it, they would just have to open the door to their homes. With this new idea, William decided to buy a few warehouses and a few shops of various products throughout the city, a way to mask and give a reason for the relationship of so many people. Being a free city, the city government is more liberal. Even being a small oligarchy, it was easy to buy things. The city of Lorith may be poor, that is, its wealth was small compared to other free cities, but it had a good number of people living there. With the current status of the region, it was possible to maintain an army of at least 5,000 soldiers, already speaking of Lycans, probably half that number. But that was for the present time. It would divide the Lycans between those who would work and those who would stay as guards. He needed some reliable eyes to keep an eye on his wealth. Until then, all the gold he had would fit into a few small coin pockets, but now with the acquisition of the Dothraki treasure, he owned a house full of gold. A plebeian would have nothing to do with so much gold. They would not actually come with a single coin in all their lives. These gold coins only showed their value in the hands of nobles and merchants. For others, it was a very large amount of money. Even if a good portion of their gold was used to buy materials and stores, much remained. But at night all the Lycans would train. It was necessary to increase the discipline of the Lycans. It was not very necessary for them to be trained by the classic rules of battle, with swords and shields, but even so, they would be trained in these arts, even if it was in less quantity than training as a Lycan. It was necessary to have some knowledge about the weapons they would confront. William was thinking about the right people to raise to tier 3. He needed to train some leaders. The problem was that nobody showed a great talent for the art of leadership. He would have to find the best among them to do that. Even if he was not talented, being good was enough, at least for the moment. Anticipating some of his plans, he would go after people with certain special skills in construction and production. The ideal would be to turn them into Lycan, but William would not force them. Even if the Lycans were strong, they needed to be treated as special units. It would be careless of William if he turned them all into Lycans. Just with things tidied up, he could do something on that scale. More special units than a heavy cavalry would be to the normal lords of that time, for besides a great deal of time disciplining their offspring, William needed to worry about the large amount of food they ate. Even if they ate the same things as ordinary humans, they ate twice as much, and what made it more expensive was the need for meat. Lycans could not stay long without eating meat, and meat was something that would not be on the commoner's table very often. But for the Lycans, it was a way to satisfy their animal side a little. Thinking of this detail, William began to invest in fishing. He would not put the Lycans out to fish. It would be a waste. He hired normal humans to do it. Even if Lorith's fishing navy was large and could produce enough food for thousands of people, these fishermen were not controlled by William, and this was a major problem for war logistics. Slowly he would do what many modern people would kill him for doing. He would make the controlling hand of the trade in Lorith. He would use this act as the first way to ensure the weakening of the magistrates, the present rulers of Lorith. The number of soldiers William needed to fight was as follows. The Council of Magistrates, which is made up of nobles, merchants and priests. The whole group has about 1,500 soldiers who are relatively well trained and armed with low to medium quality equipment. Lorith's Guard, who are those responsible for the peace of the city and also the army, in name, are controlled by the 3 princes, the harvest, the fish and the streets. These 3 princes were the former rulers of the region, but today it is more a ceremonial title. Its strength may seem numerous, but it was just a crowd without any military discipline. 2,000 poorly trained soldiers and almost no equipment, are best described as something like policemen. There are some warships that are controlled by magistrates, but as the battles will not be at sea, it will not be mentioned at this time. William was walking toward the mansion he had bought, but specifically, he was walking toward the books he had moved there. Before today he hadn't had time to check if he had gotten 7 dragon eggs. Yes he did, he thought he had found 7 wonderful dragon eggs. The problems were, he didn't know if they really were. He didn't know how to hatch them. He wasn't a Valyrian, he couldn't use the same ritual that Dany had accidentally performed. Thinking of Daenerys, he remembered the information that one of the former slaves, or rather one of the new Lycans, had given him. The great Khal Drogo was involved in many wars and was imprisoned near Meereen, could not get out of there, but had accepted the request and engaged the daughter of the House Targaryen. The marriage would take place when Drogo could finish these wars and return to Pentos. Only Meereen's journey on horseback to Pentos would take time, coupled with the delays in battles, and Khal Drogo would take a few years to enjoy this marriage. William did not know whether it was good news or bad news, but he knew that happiness had sprung up inside him. 27 comments, 0 vote. Pissed. Download the app for additional rewards. More events, more perks. Winning you more free perks. Download now. IngloriusEnd. Download app now. Unsullied. William hadn't yet gotten some information about the changes that took place when he came to this world, but today he has found out a few more details. William was currently reading a letter, one sent by his uncle Ned Stark. As a result of William's strong rapprochement with Sansa as a child, she wasn't so excited about being the future queen. She was still very feminine, but her personality had suffered from contact with her cousin. Besides complaining that because of William's influence, Sansa often came to question whether it was really necessary for her to marry Joffrey. She preferred to go and live in Bravos, a city William had always told her several stories. She didn't think that King's Landing was good enough. The world William had told her was so much wider, so full of wonders, she wanted to see some of them. William was inevitably happy with this notification. Her efforts were not in vain. Even if Sansa was too spoiled, she didn't want to sell herself to get what she wanted. She was much closer to a stronger, more independent personality. The letter still said that Arya was having a tantrum. She demanded to go see her cousin. Ned said he was seriously considering sending her here, but he needed to choose someone to take her, and so it was better that William come back soon. Little Arya already had a natural tendency to be independent, added to the tales William had told her. She was a more elaborate project of trailblazer. In the future perhaps she would really find what lies west of Westeros. Even if his uncle was rigid, he was still very good to his family. It was undeniable that he was trying to make William wish he could return. Ned was obviously eager to reunite them. After the brief family report, more urgent news had been written. Ned had received word that the girl, Targaryen, had engaged to a Khal Dothraki, and this worried the king, so he needed to send some spies to keep an eye on her, but the king wanted to kill her and her brother. It was also reported that it was no big deal, as the Khal was trapped in the midst of many enemies and might not even survive. Ned had carefully convinced the king to wait and gave the idea of sending William to interact with them, and somehow to make them disappear, or lose interest in the Iron Throne. But even for this it was too soon. He asked if William would accept this request when the time came. He was also informed that the order in White Harbor was partially completed, so the second stage would begin. William quickly wrote a letter in response, said he missed everyone, wrote that at the time he was not planning to return, but in a few months he could go to them. He also wrote that he would accept to contact the remnants of the Targaryen house, but could not see a danger to the Seven Kingdoms. After all, even if Dothrakis were numerous, they did not like the sea. The Khal only wished a quality mare to give birth to a good stallion. William also talked about the other topics. Soon some steps were heard and Emily's voice followed. "William, your servants wish to speak with you," Emily warned. He nodded, and then Emily allowed some Lycans in. The Lycans greeted him and slowly entered the room, his head slightly bent down, his arm straight beside his body, and his right hand over his heart. William nodded to them and gestured with his hands to warn them that he was dispensing with the formalities. "My lord, a ship has arrived. They say they came from Marine. They bring some Unsullied. They said they were yours." Lilith, one of the new Lycans, she possessed good skills in administration and diplomacy, thus causing William to choose her to take care of naval trade and create trade links with other places. Even if many were recently removed from slavery, they were already accustomed to the existence of slaves. When they learned that their lord had bought slaves, they reacted without much trouble. Who would dare to be angry with their lord's behavior? Even if these Unsullied ones did not know it, they were lucky. Even as slaves they should have much better lives than many, but they still believed that even if these Unsullied had been bought, they would soon be side by side, as brothers of the same race. Their lord was so good to them, and knowing that side of William, they eventually got it right. William needed slaves. No, he didn't want slaves. He needed soldiers, and who better than the Unsullied? Unfortunately, he did not possess much gold when he asked for these Unsullied to be bought, so only 50 had been bought, but it had to be said that these 50 Unsullied people would most certainly be the most disciplined soldiers he could ask for. The quality of the soldiers would undoubtedly be improved. 27 comments, 0 vote. A date. William was walking with Emily by his side, and after those 2 weeks he was doing hidden acts, she began to get agitated. For some reason, she began to get closer and closer to him over time. Her personality was slowly changing. She was still agitated, but she still became nicer, kinder. Even though she had always treated him well, now things were different. One could say better, but it was so strange. The provocations had ceased, and the conversations leaned out of the ordinary, which were about fighting and expensive swords and useful swords, for things William liked. It was almost a form of demonstration that she wanted to be more friendly with him and was really trying to be cool. But William couldn't help but look at her with a strange face. What the hell happened to her? Why did she change? No matter how much he thought, William couldn't find the reason. It was just a mystery. "Will, what are you thinking?" Emily in a sweet voice questions him. William can't help it, but look at her with her eyes wide open. She realized he was acting strange. She slapped him on the chest and spoke. "What? You look strange today." Emily talks while holding William's arm and starts to drag him along the way. William was still trying to understand. What the fuck is going on here? He was in a place he didn't want to be, that was picking out clothes, at which point Emily was looking at him like he was a model, not like he was the world's most famous star. Oh, shit. William was walking the streets with new clothes. His new clothes were white with details in dark blue, and these clothes were in a noble style common to the time. These noble tunics fit him well, even if they were a little expensive, they were worth it. If he looked sideways, he would realize that even today, after so long, many people still looked at him as if he were some kind of tourist attraction. In fact, it was much more intense. William and Emily had gone to a seafood restaurant to eat. Do you have something to tell me? William couldn't pretend anything was going on anymore and decided to ask. Emily looks at him as if he doesn't understand what he's saying, and then a sudden realization hits her. You look very handsome in those clothes, Emily answers as he shakes his head in approval. Something beyond that, William asks once again. She looks at him and then smiles. You look really gorgeous, Emily responds with a glint in her eyes. William gets a big question mark on his face. Okay, I won't roll anymore. I wonder what you're doing to make yourself more handsome every day. Emily speaks with great emotion in his voice. William remains silent, trying to understand what she's saying. Seriously, don't tell me you're just handsome. Well, that's true, maybe you're the most handsome man I've ever seen. But that's not the point. The last few days you've been out at night and every time you come back you change a little. Some too many muscles here, others there, your face, your skin even becomes more attractive. Tell me, please, what are you doing? Emily starts chattering nonstop. Every word that came out of your mouth ended up gaining an extra tone of urgency. William takes his hand to his face and passes lightly. He hadn't realized it. With a look at his muscles he realized they were more defined, and the reason he went to buy clothes. His old ones were getting too short. Even though those clothes were long as a rule, they were short now. With this sudden perception, new information began to be unveiled. Emily was of his height, but now looking at her, no doubt she was a lower head than he was. So many changes and he didn't even notice before. Well, to defend himself he could say that he was very busy with all the newcomers, training service, wait, he always felt better and stronger when hunting, and now he did it almost every day to train his descendants. He didn't expect the changes to be so drastic. Taking the silver plate that was on the table, William tried to see its reflection. Wow, really, wow, he was very charming. William the little hypocrite. He was dazzling. The lupine details on his face made him look very lethal. The magnetic attraction his eyes conveyed, they were undoubtedly exposed. In just a few months he had lost most of his childish appearance, all of which had been replaced by the gallant air of a young man. A worthy first Lycan, it's worth mentioning. He had already noticed that his Lycan form was more sophisticated, more majestic, however, only now had he realized the change. What a wonderful thing. Looking at Emily who was waiting for an answer he decided to provoke her. Well, I've turned into a man, maybe if you sleep with me you can gain some benefit, William responds provocatively in a mocking manner. Emily looks at him without understanding the real implication of sleeping with me, and answers. Are you saying that by sleeping I can look more beautiful? Emily asks with some anxiety in his voice. William realized that she took the phrase to a more lovely side and decided to be more incisive. Surely if you sleep with me, you'll have lots of changes, more beautiful skin, softer hair, silkier beauty, and your eyes will shine brighter. All the changes they say happen when someone sleeps next to someone else, William replies in a more cheerful way, playing with this clumsy girl. You mean if we have sex, I'll look better? Emily spoke with a little doubt in her voice, and she didn't know if he was trying to trick her or if it was real. After all, he knew many things, much more than she did. She began to think, and a sudden realization took hold of her. Her sister, after her sister's wedding the things William had said had happened, and even more than that, her breasts and buttocks had become fatter. That's why her sister turned red and didn't want to tell the answer. Should she try? If she was going to test, maybe it would be good if she went with him. After all, he was the man, apart from her father, who was closest to her. She looked at William, and realized it wouldn't be unpleasant for her to have a contact more intimate with him, but she was still inexperienced. She had boyfriends, but it never went that far. But well, when they met he was so cute, but then as time went on he grew and she felt more and more attracted to him. It was strange for her to feel that, it was also attractive. She was not futile, but he was really seductive. His traits were so prominent. His smell, my God, his smell was irresistible. It awakened something in her. It was as if something was calling to her, awakening some hidden part. Her body always woke up next to his. It was strange to her, but after a certain day she began to dream about him, and in the dream they were more than just friends, and even if she didn't love him now, he was certainly the prototype of the man she considered ideal. William was struck by lightning. He had got it wrong. She had understood from the beginning. But, I don't love you. I'm very fond of you, but you're like a little brother. Emily replied sincerely and timidly, her face turned a little red and averted her eyes. William had been struck by another bolt of lightning, a different perception popped into his mind, he decided to take a chance. Life is short. For humans, he didn't even know if he was immortal yet, it wouldn't be a sin to enjoy life, would it? Let's take a chance. Well, it doesn't have to be out of love, a great deal of affection is enough, even if you see me as a little brother and I see you as an older sister, we're not bound by blood, we could, you know. Enjoy something beyond. It might be wrong if we were strangers, but maybe, you know, we could deepen our relationship, we could do a few more things, it wouldn't be so wrong after all, we're from home. William answered with an educated tone, a little too excited, but he took a chance. But he was terrible with words at that moment, but slowly he walked up to her and held her by one hand around his waist and took another hand to lightly caress his face. Slowly approaching his ear, William spoke slowly and magnetically. We can create special memorials, ours alone, he spoke in a husky voice near his ear, making Emily's whole neck warm. All the axe and strong smell that came from his body made Emily tremble and her cheeks turn red, she felt her legs weak as she slowly leaned on William. Would he have just a little bit more luck? Might Guy began to shout his typical talk of youth somewhere, but the sense here was different, a little more adult. The dice have been rolled. Would William be able to enjoy life a little more, even without the love of his life? See in the next episode of Laughing Face. 23 comments 0 vote. Let it burn like fire. Emily felt weak as William's strong arms enveloped her, the warmth of her body increased, something inside her was giving way, it was every second closer to showing her instincts. Even if it hadn't been too long for the two of them, that moment of connection would have lasted a long time, even if they decided to stop at that very moment, the memory would be recorded in their minds. Even if until then, only an act of affection, a simple gesture of appreciation, a demonstration of their feelings, even if physical, had happened. It was a memorable moment. The first step to start a fire could undoubtedly be caused by a glowing ember. From the moment she contacted William in King's Landing, Emily had already felt something different, and every time she tried to get his attention, by bad luck, when she had the first chance to get close to him, her sister turned out to be faster. She hadn't minded, after all it was just an attraction, an appreciation for beauty, nothing more certain. But she was wrong, how silly was she? Every moment she lied to herself and said that he was a little brother, a naive attempt to deceive herself, but he was not, he was the guy, Mr. Perfect. With each day that passed, she felt more fascination for him, it was such a strange thing, she knew that she did not love him, but she began to fear that she was falling in love, something that was never under her control. It was initially an attraction that passed for a naive affection, but then, after one night, all her dreams there was a man, and in all the days that followed, she and that man became closer, and had even done shameful things. How daring was she? How dirty was she? He was just a young man, even though he was already at the age of marriage, he was still so pure. Well, that's what she thought until she found out that he was not so naive, she could not forget those eyes that wanted to devour her. The fire had gained fuel and was close to an explosion. While she let his body be embraced by him and listened to the seductive whispers he spoke to her, she was giving herself up, she was close to letting her desires possess her. Maybe, just maybe, even if it wasn't forever, even if it was just once, she wanted to feel the passion burn, and even if there weren't even ashes left, she would still be happy. Even if it became just a memory, it would be precious to her. A soft wet lip slowly touched the skin of her neck, the heat she began to feel was increasing, her body was shaking, it was all so new, she had never given herself up to this point before, but it was good, she didn't regret it. After the first touch of Emily, William wished for more, wished to devour her right there, it was an almost uncontrollable urge, he felt the sweet reactions she had to every touch, to every kiss he gave. When his lips joined it was electrifying, a flame was gathering strength, the passion of the moment was deadly. Between kisses and hugs, they were getting lost in each other's contact. But then reality struck them hard, they weren't in the right place, many eyes were looking at them, damn them, they were gone, didn't they see that something special was about to happen? With vigor, William held her up in his arms, just as a princess carried her, ran like a madman, he needed to get to his room, it was a matter of life and death. The life or death of an unforgettable moment. As they ran, they wouldn't stop exchanging kisses and caresses, in case William wasn't who he was, they wouldn't get out of the alleyways, and they'd end up like animals, getting lost in that intoxicating passion right there, in front of all those curious bastards. Luckily the inn was close by, with one hand William opened the door, with the other carrying a beautiful maiden. He hurriedly closed the door, locked it and forgot the rest of the world. With a feral movement, far beyond a human, like animals they began to act. William hurriedly tore Emily's clothes wildly, and she responded accordingly, vigorously tearing his. Revenge. A sweet revenge, an intoxicating passion. Even if hearts were not in perfect sync, their bodies began to stay. After a time of burning passion, a sweet groan of pain from a young woman was heard. After that, a hallucinating battle, so epic and enduring, followed. From late into the night, they didn't stop. That night no one slept until dawn, they just burned that passion together. A memorable moment, a memory they would never forget. Even if it wasn't love, was it impure? I tell you no, it was a form of purity, it was beautiful. 26 comments 0 vote. Before the storm, William woke up and looked at the young goddess who slept vulnerable with her head on his chest. A body so delicate and pure that he turned it into much more than a word could express. He carefully got up, took a quick bath, and went downstairs to pick up some food, with the food in hand, and carefully returned to his room. Emily had already woken up when he returned. She had an empty gaze still, but as soon as she saw him come in with food in his hands like a juggler, she couldn't hold on and expressed a smile so beautiful it made William freeze. Look who'd say, you can be delicate. Emily in a sarcastic voice, she emphasized at the end. I'm sorry, you're just irresistible. William tried to defend himself. After all, what could be stopping him from eagerly devouring something so beautiful? William couldn't. He was a little too crude, perhaps. With a huge smile, Emily tried to get up, only to realize that she hadn't regained her strength in her legs. With a surprised look she accused him. Brute, look what you've done. I can't even get up. Emily with accusing eyes provoked him, but his gestures were only the delicacy. Like a helpless being she tried to get into bed. William quickly left his food and drink on the table and went to her. Carefully he helped her tidy up. She was irresistible at that moment. He couldn't help but hug her and steal her lips, but in response he was pushed. Emily speaks as he pushes William and tries to avoid him. What young woman would let her lover feel her filthiness? William disrespected her and kissed her. If you had recovered, I wouldn't even let you rest, William replied as he laughed lightly. It was undeniable that by lighting this fire, he wished he could burn more. Ha, like I'm going to do that to you again. Weren't we supposed to have a souvenir? Then we have it. Now we are back to the way we were before. Emily answers authoritatively and mockingly. She was provoking him, using her arguments to deny his desire. William was briefly blank, but quickly found a way to counter. Yes, we have one, but we have so much time. I'm sure we'll have time to have more. Many other memories. William spoke in a sagacious tone and rushed to feed her and cared attentively for her. He had demanded too much of her last night, now the least he could do was be careful with her. Even if William did not forgive his enemies and cruelty was what best defined him, to his family he gave loyalty, to his mistress, out of respect, he would treat her as best he could. A few hours had passed. William had left Emily in his room at the mansion and went out to see the Immaculate. He needed to pay attention to other aspects of his life. At night he would return to take care of her. Yesterday they didn't even go to his house. It was really crazy. Walking down the slightly crowded streets, William was headed for one of the houses he bought. The Immaculate were camouflaged as normal people. Their equipment had been illegally transported. They didn't want to attract attention. It was one thing for William to buy several shops and houses, another for soldiers. Even if he could conquer Lorith now, there was no reason to create chaos, not one that was unnecessary. Lilith, the woman in her mid-30s, with dark brunette skin, voluptuous body, and emerald green eyes, was waiting for him. Of all the aspects of his manager, two more drew William's attention. These were not the slight scar that was on her right cheek, which gave her an appearance of being aggressive, not even her personality that was far more savage than one might imagine. Obviously she knew when being neutral, calm, and so many other things, was one of her talents after all. But what really caught her attention were her managerial skills of a legendary level and a diplomatic talent that would frighten anyone. This beautiful woman had ended up at the hands of Dothraki, had suffered, but not nearly as much as others, suffered, but by no means suffered lightly. She used her physical and mental gifts to get rid of the fate of having to serve everyone, to a sad but lesser fate, which was to be the wife of a Khal. She did not have many options, so she told us. She lived with her family, parents and husband, near Volantis, in a small town that did not have many people. They took care of a small shop, but it was flourishing. They could already glimpse a future of riches. But cruel fate played with it. One night the noise of horses, the other day the bed of a stranger. When William turned her into Lycan, he felt something. He felt something about her. To his surprise his gift work made those who were talented feel. Their minds were much more vibrant and shone in different colors. Somehow the color green and blue were linked to her talents, so it was impossible to know if it was real for the time being. Even if William felt it was also difficult to know what color represented what, but it was worth investing in that feeling. Surely she would be a good first minister. Ideas for a future, perhaps not so far away. Lorith needed some more time. It was the simplest place he could find to conquer, but even so, he needed care. One mistake, and much would die in vain. Following the beautiful brunette, William was taken to the 50 men who possessed a title that was nothing less than legendary. All these men were young, just over 20 years old, had finished their training in a short time, were ready for battle. But the way to fight now was different and they would need to become more than just men. So 50 feet unsullied, Lycans were born. And between them two had minds that glowed red and orange. William felt he had found a general and perhaps his admiral, only to find out which was which. One chose the name, Cheese, and the other, Dakak. Cheese was tall for the people of Westeros. He was about 6 feet tall and had a skin color as black as night, his body as robust and his eyes green. His most striking feature were 2 scars forming a V-shaped face. Darak was a little lower, near 1.78. His skin color was dark, his eyes black, was totally bald and there was lack of half of his left ear. Both were highly respected among the Unsullied, but a shame was his personality, all were shaped the same. With almost all the leaders he needed for the moment had emerged, William was ready to take the next step. 16 comments 0 vote. Sharpen one's claws. William, after creating these new 50 Lycans, he began to realize that it was getting harder to create new Lycans through these rituals. It was as if something in him was not enough. According to the books, this form of ritual he used was one of the forms of blood magic, but unlike that which required many sacrifices, the ritual that William was an adaptation that would use his strength, his spirit. It was a very obscure idea. Few books touch the spirit, most of them a mention of using spirit to connect to something, and with that to change something in the real world. With various forms of rituals, the most commonly used for spirit connection would be in relation to something they called gods. The understanding of the gods was even more obscure. They were cited as something that reminded the living spirits that had manifestation in the world. The greatest current example for these gods would be in relation to R'hllor, the Lord of Light, or Red God, as he is called in Westeros, would be an ancient entity that fights against the Great Other, who would be the god of ice and death. But in the end they would both be the manifestation of a spirit over matter. Already the ritual was the opposite. The soul of the individual was used as material to then affect the spirit, each individual having a different spiritual force, which was directly linked to his soul. William thought it was something like the concept of mana, but at the same time it was not. Unlike the mana that would recover, the force of the soul was constant, only with a stronger soul the amount that could be used grew. The problem was that it was very difficult to strengthen the soul. It was much easier to create a bond with a manifested spirit, or a god, as you choose to call in being your follower or summoner. You could use them as a means to replace the use of ritual. It would be to something like a spiritual magician using the strength of his contracted spirit to use magic. Both forms of performing this ritual or access to magic had their benefits. The rituals focused more on the body of the individual or on solid items. The use of summons extends to the manipulation and use of an elemental power, may be the power to use fire, ice, healing magic, or even resurrection. One of the main factors for you to use these forms of magic were to have a minimally strong soul, and to have access to the form of the ritual, which would be some symbols like the runic or ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, depended on the function of the ritual you want. The runes were used for solid items, the hieroglyphics on individuals. Already in the summons you would need to agree with the manifestations of the spirit, such as being a worshipper of fire and life in order to be minimally worthy of receiving some ability to manifest the power of R'hllor. The closer to your teachings, the greater the amount of your power could be used. It would be something like a priestess using the power of her lord's fire through summoning the will of that being, usually using songs that tried to attract the will of the spirit. Already in the ritual, as a rule he should make some symbols and then use his blood for confirmation, but things were always complicated. In the ritual you never knew if you could achieve your goal. This happens because you did not know how much soul strength remained until you were with all your busy, and William felt that he had already occupied a large part of his power. Perhaps his limit was just over 1200 with luck near 1500, he was not sure. The means to use more power as a spiritual magician or priest was approaching the manifestation of his god, the will. For the users of rituals it took time. With the years their souls grew larger and more things they would be able to do. Perhaps there were other means, but for now it was just the one William knew. But as a benefit of being the great Lycan patriarch, with the strengthening of the soul of his followers, his soul grew stronger. However, the increase was slow, but at least it would always be there. Luckily he did not need to worry about those created by natural means, but to update his followers, he needed them to be spiritually strong, so being one of his requirements to update, he discovered when he went to try to pass some Lycans to Tier 2 and could not, causing him to read the books again and with that understood this need. For those Lycans created by other Tier 3, well there are only two, currently, one being Cheese another being Lilith, they needed to depend on their own soul forces. The Lycans were special units, unfortunately they would not be what else would exist in their army. Maybe it was not a good idea to do Immaculate in Lycans, after all they were already excellent soldiers, even without that power, but, now it was obvious, Lycans would not be done at all times, many normal soldiers would be raised. Leaving these thoughts aside, William was organizing some plans together with Lilith about the next actions to control Lorith's trade. With one stroke of the pen, they could steal the region's monopoly and weaken its opponents. Sir, the profits are growing, our stores are not currently being interfered with by the oligarchs, but when we are fat, they will attack us. Lilith was standing, her clothes were a little too revealing. A yellow dress with several openings that accentuated her curves. The length was medium near the knees, one could say it was short, but it was something sophisticated, however, a little vulgar because of her curves. This outfit made her tanned brown skin have an irresistible charm. It was simply impossible for William not to steal some looks. She did not mind being looked at, but William tried to avoid. It was a lack of respect with his subordinate after all. So the ideal was to expand quickly and grow to the point where we could stop them, so I recommend that we follow the plans I showed you earlier. Lilith continued to try to give more weight to her ideas, and what would those be? Well, it was much more necessary these days to weaken his opponents. Lycans could not be generated at any time he needed to protect his strength. The ideal was to get one with one blow to drag the leaders of this region down and steal his soldiers for him. Murder. William wondered if it was ideal for the moment, but he decided to leave it to her. The talents she possessed gave him that confidence. We'll follow your plans, you can do it the way you think it should be done. William decided this way, trusting the talents was something that many leaders did, and he needed to start doing it or nothing would be done. With many responsibilities on himself, things would just take longer. Thank you, Will, Lord, for the trust. Lilith was immensely happy with William's gesture of trust, almost went to him to embrace him. Even a strong woman, in those times, it was rare to find anyone who trusted her. She was inevitably happy and excited by her lord's trust. William nodded and looked at his military leaders, Cheese and Dakik. Prepare some of the best men for the operations Lilith chooses, make things happen in the best way possible. William gave his order, got up, and left. Since he was already being ambitious, why not strengthen himself to the point where he could dominate this entire Essos region? Surely he wanted, after Lorith, if he had time, he could conquer Bravos, then Pentos, Norvos, Mur and so on. Maybe one day all of Essos would be his. But many plans should be made. At first, naval and commercial control should develop, and with Lorith as a base, everything would be on track. Today, some intrigues have been prepared. It would be much easier to control a place without leaders, wouldn't it? With that, plans for commercial expansion encouraged by assassinations in due course were planned. The blood of magistrates would dye the earth red. William was also thinking of a way for Emily to turn into a Lycan, and he could not risk losing his soul capacity before making those specials for him stronger. Perhaps in the near future he should go after the Red Priestesses, try to know more about that. Lord of Light, see the benefits he could get from this information. Maybe there is a way to make his soul grow or perhaps use other magic. 23 comments 0 vote. A dark day. The weather in the last few days had changed. From a usual sunny day to colder and darker days, a fog had arrived in Lorith, and things began to get more sinister. Somehow the strange weather made the quiet free city look suspicious. Something was strange, and in these last days, only confirmation remained. Today, to make the weather even more gloomy, it was raining. A heavy rain tormented them since before sunrise. All those who needed to leave ended up having to face, in the stretches where there was no pavement in the streets, a large amount of mud. With a bit of bad luck you could lose your balance and fall, with luck you would just get soaked. But amidst such a gloomy climate that many would not even dare to leave their homes, one boy was walking through the muddy streets. With some form of protection that in a very rudimentary way resembled an umbrella, this boy walked fearlessly, only worried about getting dirty. This climate, on some occasions, could be the least of the impediments to anyone leaving home. Who would have thought? A few days ago, some strange beings had begun to go out at night. They said they were some kind of bad spirits, as if casual encounters in front of the eyes of some unlucky one were not enough. A dark form in the darkness that quickly disappeared. They said they evaporated in the night. Others, that ran over the houses looking for more victims. But what was irrefutable was that every time they were seen, on every occasion, soon after some piles of flesh were found, some remains that someday, as frightening as it may seem, belonged to a human. It was undeniably frightening. But even so, would a young man dare to leave? Even in such a frightening climate? Well, maybe some did, but most didn't. That young man was the one behind these events. What do you mean by that? You might ask. Only those close to him knew, but even so, some who were a bit clever ended up suspecting, this young man could be beautiful, could be noble, but he was really a frightening and cruel being. Sure, frightening and cruel to those who had the misfortune to cross his path and call themselves enemies, but even then he could not deny his cruel personality. And now this same young man was walking with only concern not to get his expensive clothes dirty. He was walking towards an unexpected place, a place that no commoner dared to walk. They could not have the misfortune to anger the people there. But, going back to the gossip of the last few days, those bodies that had been found, to everyone's surprise, were from some of the leaders of the region. If they were commoners it wouldn't impact so much. After all, times are hard, and it was very easy to have the bad luck to find a sadistic bandit while you were trying to go home after a hard day's work. But now, important people had died. Besides dying, you couldn't even say they were human bodies when they were found. Only a few unworthy of their families could tell what was happening. The funny thing is that there was no mourning. The other bosses didn't even blink an eye, in fact as vultures attacked the carcass. But what was unexpected was that a beautiful brunette woman who ran a commercial company that had just been born was getting the juiciest pieces. It was so enviable, it barely arrived and had already made a small commercial enterprise grow to a point that was bothering the big ones. Maybe it even became the biggest organization here. A surprise. How much talent and luck did it take to grow among oligarchs? But that news only ran through the homes of the richest. The poor could only think of the monsters in the stories. They said it was dangerous to go out at night. With a bit of bad luck and you'd become a snack, even though most of those unfortunate enough to know them were near dangerous places, but still gangs disappeared overnight, so many were killed that those who were criminals either ran away from Lorith, or went into some hole to hide. In a way, these evil spirits were good for Lorith. How strange. But even so, the scenery was so frightening, and now someone still dared to venture into a day that looked more like night. That young man walked carefree on such a dark day. Was he brave or crazy? The young man's footsteps were careful. He didn't want to get his clothes dirty, but he wouldn't allow himself to stand in some refuge. With his rustic leather umbrella and wooden frame, he was trying to reach his destination. If you had the gift of observation, you could see that some other individuals were hiding in the dark shadows of the alleys and slowly following this young man. It was not known here whether it was to pursue him for evil or for good, whether they wanted to kill him or protect him. But they were still, in the same slow way, following him. With a good sniff in the air, the young man knew the answer. The smells for a long time were already an easy factor to manipulate. For a long time his sense of smell had become powerful. But with the answer about his pursuers, a surprised look crossed his eyes. He wanted to turn and go to them, but no, he would leave it as it was, follow his plans. Accelerating his steps carefully, the young man did not take long to reach his goal. In front of an iron gate with high, rusty bars, the young man walked to a man in noble but cheap clothes, who was waiting for him accompanied by some guards who were wearing silver-painted leather armor. Unlike the young man who wore what could hardly be called an umbrella, for his rustic appearance, this old man with sharp eyes and prominent nose waited under on the protection of a simple cover. A place commonly used only by guards, was a very humble place for someone who wanted to pass himself off as important. This man was there waiting for the young man. If you had been looking for some time, you would see that he was waiting for many hours and from time to time he would walk back and forth aggressively. If you looked closer, you would see that in the sharp eyes of this old man who was probably in his 50s, fear and respect were present. When the young man arrived, the old man did not hold on, took a few steps, and even going out for a while he took shelter and being lightly struck by the cold rain waters, he bowed a little bit, crossing his hand on his chest over his heart and the work folded backwards from his body, a slight bow of head, and then he prepared to speak. The young man responded with a hand gesture indicating that he would be quiet, and then he began to walk toward the large mansion which stood beyond these gates. A little surprise crossed the old man's face, but he followed the young man's orders, and after waiting for the young man to take the lead, he followed him carefully and quickly. The courtyard of this place was beautiful, many ornamental plants and trees, a small lake, and the like. The old man just took a look, didn't get too excited, even if it was aristocratically decorated. It was a courtyard in a very common style. Many other noble houses had similar things. The big mansion on the other hand was grandiose and in a more striking way was undoubtedly its architectural form. It was a work from an ancient time. Perhaps it had been here since Lorith had been created, but it was still a memorable building. Long ago it belonged to one of the rulers of the region, but now it was in the hand of a foreigner. When the young man arrived near the door, two maids opened it and respectfully let him in. A third woman came forward and began to take care of him, took off her coat and wiped the traces of water. With a gesture of hands, the young man told the maids to leave, and with another hand movement he indicated that they should sit down. With a little urgency, the old man could not hold on, walked closer to the young man and did a little reverence again, returning to an upright posture with an expression of respect and undeniable anxiety in his eyes, began to spill the subject that made him wait so long in front of this old mansion. Young sir, I would like to congratulate you on the great acquisition you have had. The fortune is smiling at you, luck certainly loves you. The old man spoke in a way to please the ego of this dangerous young man in front of him, but only an emotionless look was received as a reward, but without care he continued to speak. I am the Prince of Harvest. I can help you in many things. From what my old bones tell me, your ambition is not limited by the business you acquired the other day. In a more explicit way, the old man began to indicate his reason for coming here. Without excitement about what the old man told him, the young man answered in a cold voice. I have a name. My name is William. William Corvinus. And I don't need your help. My ambition interests me only. You have no reason to interfere here. You can go back where you came from. I have more important business that requires my attention. William answered coldly, and no trace of sympathy remained. He was the second of the so-called princes, who had come here after his business had flourished. The first, with less respect, demanded that William give him half of his assets, and if he didn't, threaten to leave him with nothing. The result of that disrespect was a pile of bones being found near a sewer. A pity they chose the wrong person to threaten. The funny thing was that his heir came soon after and with fear, swore loyalty to William, and with anxiety began to tell secrets and everything he thought was important, but it wasn't. William just listened. They could be from old families in Lorith, however, they were unimportant, but even if he didn't need them, William could very well use them, so he got the Prince of Fishes under his control, but he didn't make that guy into a Lycan. Poor princes, they were nothing more than mangy dogs who were driven from their homes and were now anxious to obtain something. Even if their titles would facilitate the acquisition of more influence, it was not something indispensable. Mr. Corvinus, forgive me for the lack of polishing. I know I have not much to offer beyond my title, but if you help me, The old man had tried to speak, but was rudely interrupted. Nothing else. Apart from your title, which I don't care about, you have nothing else I could be the least bit interested in, William spoke sarcastically. The old man was left blank in shock. He had imagined it would be difficult, but wasn't this young man much more complicated than expected? He carefully tried to insist. I understand Mr. Corvinus thinks so, but, my aunt was a very beautiful woman and lucky enough to marry a man of great power. The old man, entitled Prince, had begun to show his intentions. This man was from Bravos and his family business was the banker. Well, he was one of the bosses behind the Iron Bank. Great luck, right? But he didn't stop there. My lucky cousin married another man who was the same as her father, one of the members of the Iron Bank, and luckier still inherited everything that belonged to his father because he had no other heirs, so now I have a beautiful young niece who is waiting for a suitable man to be her husband, even if she is not heir to all the wealth of her parents, because she has other brothers, her beauty is unequaled. Then the damned old man came to the point. He wanted to sell his niece to gain control of Lorith. Surely there was something wrong with this story. What was the benefit of marrying a young woman with so much potential to someone who only controlled more than half the business in Lorith? The poorest city among the free cities. She's a beautiful young woman, but very complicated. Her only problem is her personality, slightly distorted. The old man kept talking. William was curious as to why they offered him the hand of a maiden of such potential. He was not in the least interested in an arranged marriage, but now understanding what had happened, he understood the motives. They were willing to give him a commodity with hidden problems in exchange for all he had. Not wanting to pay any attention to what the old man wanted to keep talking about, William waved to one of the maids to drag this man away. He didn't have to say much to know she was a Lycan. It would be easy for her to drive this man away. Sir Corvinus, you got me wrong. I want nothing from Lorith, only your goodwill. I don't want to be driven off my family's land. I want my people to stay in Lorith. The old man was desperately trying to convince William of a failed business. It was not worth it. With a nod of the head, the maids carried a desperate old man out. Things happened very quickly. Lilith's plans were very well planned, and the executioners were experts in persecution. First she discovered the habits of the nobles. With these routines discovered, things were plotted, choosing those she wanted killed and killed. Each death in its own time. Always before things happened, she planned how to maximize business gains, and William had to praise, it worked. From a company with a lot of potential, to a company that controlled more than half of all the merchandise that came to Lorith and was resold, were several workshops installed in the city itself. With one small order and the military supplies destined for the magistrates were stopped. With another, the money destined for Lorith's soldiers was stolen, and that same money was used to bribe them. One could say it was early, but one could say it had already taken too long for things to stay at that point, but in 3 months things were ready. The rivals were weakened, their soldiers were out of morale, or they were controlled by William, and the funny thing is that many of the naive ended up choosing a partnership with him. William wanted absolute control over Lorith, there could be no mistake in this place, everything should belong to him. From the grain of wheat to the fireplace, to the soldier's armor or the merchant's ship, everything should come from William. Now the only thing left was that the training of all the soldiers was ready. Today there were 800 Lycans, of those in the army there were 500, the other 300 were specialized in other things like espionage and research, but the main point was the need for these individuals to have children, it was necessary for the Lycan army to start growing naturally. These 500 Lycans were being trained to be unstoppable soldiers, trained to be a special force that really was special. Cheese slowly entered the room, with the helmet being held by his right arm against his chest. Looking at William, he bowed and began to tell something that William had been waiting for a long time. Sir, the soldiers are trained, ready for combat. Cheese spoke stoically, only his eyes showed the respect he gave his lord. Rising from his chair, William commands. Prepare the men, by nightfall the Lycans go to war. William replied in a dominant way, it was about time little Lorith had a new lord. 10 comments 0 vote. Emily's choice. It was necessary to set things straight before he left. First William needed to warn Emily, even though it had been so long, he had not yet told of his special condition. Even though their relationship over all this time had been good, very intimate, by the way. He was still afraid of the reaction of those close to him when these people discovered that he was something more than human. As such he formulated an explanation for this, a bit simple, but involving a lot of legend of the people of this place. With this it could be possible to convince that it was something possible. William began to walk slowly to the second floor of his mansion. This house was acquired shortly after the death of one of the magistrates. It turned out to be a little cheap at the time. No doubt a great deal. The house was spacious, even if it was old it was very comfortable. The details and furniture were sophisticated, typical for aristocratic families. Even if Lorith was the poorest free city, it does not mean that the profits of those who controlled it were small. The gold shone brightly in secret rooms inside the house of these important people. Even if the relationship between William and Emily had grown closer, they still slept in separate rooms, and at some special times, they ended up infiltrating each other's rooms. After the first act, their games began to take on more tones, more details. They were much closer now, that was undoubtedly a reality. William wanted very much to be accepted by her, in his total condition. Secrets always drive away those who are close, he didn't want that to happen to him. Maybe now was the time to move on, beyond all they knew of each other, to some form of mutual trust. Emily also possessed many secrets, as a result of which she accepted William's secrets better. Slowly opening the door to the young lady's room, William began to get a little anxious about her reaction the moment she discovered that he was a Lycan. If things worked out, it would be excellent, even better if she accepted to become one of them, and what he would make her be, no doubt would be the real Lycan, in those he called elders, even though they were not very close to full potential today, had many advantages that any other Lycan form, funny as it may seem, was much more like a vampire than a Lycan itself. As the physical changes in its half Lycan form would be the appearance of 4 fangs, the eyes would be brighter and if desired, sharp claws would appear. Another reason to do she an elder, was to motivate him to find ways to complete this form. Make them stronger, make it harder for them to die. Emily was sitting in her chair, reading a book that was on the desk. She paid a lot of attention, it should be something really interesting. William approached her silently, arriving near her with a gesture that showed his affection, gently stroking Emily's head. Not expecting to be touched at a time like this, Emily ended up receiving a little fright, but when she saw William, she couldn't stop a smile from growing on her face. What? It's not night yet. She spoke in a way that provoked him, trying to imply that he was just looking for her to perform certain activities. I don't come to you just for that. You know I've been too busy these past few months. William tried in an agitated way to defend himself. He felt guilty for not giving her his due attention, but he needed to work things out in Lorith in the best way possible, and the more effort he put in, the faster he would be able to take the time to enjoy each other's company. Emily spoke with a spoiled face. She understood that William was working hard. She knew that even if it wasn't love, she felt she was desperately in love, but she couldn't be sure it was reciprocal, even if he spoke, even if he acted like one. In fact, it was that after a while she wanted to get closer to him, and he was unfortunately busy, with only a few nights left that they could unite, and try to drown the longing for a future that wasn't even truly born. I'm sorry, I know you're busy, I know we're enjoying life together, but I want more, you have to satisfy me or Emily speaks in a more understanding voice, but in the end, she went back to her troublesome personality and threatened him by looking at the bed. She decided to end her threat. She knew that it was cruel, because he had other obligations, but she needed more of him. She needed more affection and attention from him. William was a little sad to see that he was failing as a lover, but he needed to solve many things. His presence was necessary to raise the morale of his offspring. He needed to organize things, select plans, even if he had the support of Lilith, Cheese, and Darak, there were many details to be arranged. I'm sorry, Emily. I know I promised you many good memories, but soon after I started running around, but there's just a little more to come. Actually, I'm here to tell you a few things. William tried to pack things up, but those things needed a little more time. Emily looked at him and seeing that he had a sad look in his eyes, she couldn't stop herself, got up and walked toward him, and when she got close to him and hugged him. I'm sorry, I still have that personality. I'm actually very happy, life is good and things are interesting. She's trying to lessen the burden of guilt William was feeling. You don't have to tell me everything you do, or even stop doing those things, I don't demand that of you. Just don't leave me alone, okay? She talked to an older sister, she still used to act that way. Well, everyone has their fetishes, right? And William would like to have a big sister like her. He held her tightly, and slowly approached his lips to her delicate lips and lightly kissed her. Thank you for understanding me, William replied gratefully. Even if he couldn't keep his promises until that moment, it doesn't mean he wouldn't go in the future, does it? Moving slightly away from his hug, he looked deep into her eyes. He was gaining the courage to tell one of his secrets. Emily, I'm going to tell you something very serious. It's a secret for now, but soon everyone will know. He spoke assertively. Do you know a little about me, about my past, about my mother, and my father? William begins to get into the subject. Yes, we've talked about that. His mother's name is Linda Stark and he's the younger sister of the current Hand of the King of Westeros. His father was Marcus Corvinus, a nobleman who came from a faraway place that no one knows for sure from where. She says. That's right, and I ended up inheriting certain things from each. You know the Stark symbol is a dire wolf, right? So, the reason for that is that they have a very strong bond with them, makes even several Starks have some special abilities. William begins his argument in an educational way, trying to convince her. Close to wolves and special powers, what are you talking about? Emily starts to get curious, but she was still suspicious, maybe William was playing with her. Yes, close to wolves somehow, I'm not sure, but skills involve entering the wolves' minds and even commanding their bodies as if they were theirs, but it's rare to hear anything these days. William. You mean the wargs? I've heard stories about them, are they real? Emily talks a little excited and holds William to answer it. You're kidding, right? She asks with a suspicious look. Yes, that's what I'm talking about, but not exactly this. Before he could continue, she interrupted him. You mean you can do these things, really? Show me. Emily started acting like an excited kid, even if she was still a little suspicious, she'd rather it was true. It's not really that. William tries to answer. I knew it. You're kidding. She lets him go and walks away with an accusing look. No, I'm not. It's about that, but I haven't finished the story, so wait a minute. William responds, trying to get close to her again. Okay, say it. Emily decides to wait for him to tell the whole story. So the Starks are close to the wolves, but the Corvinus. Well, I don't know, but I know the result of mixing their bloodline is, I know what I can do. William steps away from Emily, he would show her his powers. Approaching an iron candlestick, William took him by the hand. Pay attention, he spoke, and then with the force of his arms, the solid iron candlestick was bent. Wow, you're strong, Emily reacted animatedly to the scene she saw. It was a sturdy object, you could bend it, but not that way, not that easily. To be sure of what was going on, she approached and took the candlestick and tried to bend it, just as William had done. Even though she was strong because of her training, she could only bend a little. You mean you're stronger than an ordinary man because of your lineage? Emily wonders what William was trying to say. That's amazing, I've seen other people who could do something like that, but they were full of muscles, as big as a horse. She continues to speak. That's just the beginning, there's more to it. William carefully approached her. More. Show me. Fast, fast. She jumped into William's arms and as a spoiled child was forcing him to show her. Okay, but don't be afraid, it's weird, but, is it normal? William, with a little uncertainty about how he should talk to minimize the impact, he was about to enter the most delicate part, he wanted to go slowly so as not to frighten her. He reached out his hand and made his fingernails grow, became lethal claws, and before Emily could react to that scene, 4 long fangs appeared in his mouth. It was near the site of a vampire showing his fangs. There were only 2 other fangs at the underside as a bonus. Wow, what is that? That's what you meant by close to wolves. What's that for? Is it sharp? Can I touch it? Emily got excited about the scene and started approaching and extended his hand to touch. William let her pull over. That would make the next scenes she'd see more easy to digest. Careful is sharp, he warned, and then went and took the candlestick again and tore it in 2 using his claws. Wow, that is so cool. An excited Emily was looking closely at the cut mark on the candlestick. It's a hidden weapon. Nobody expects it from there. When they least expect it, bang. You catch them off guard. I wish I had, too. She starts talking excitedly about some scenarios that these claws might be useful, and with a more muffled voice she grumbled that she wanted to be able to do that, too. William undid this partial transformation and embraced her. He was glad she accepted that part of him. That's one thing. There's more to it, but now I have to tell you. Don't be afraid, okay? It's me. I wouldn't hurt you, okay? William began to prepare her for the last step. There's more. I want to see it. Don't worry. I'm not scared. Go quick. Show me. She began to speak impatiently. She wanted to see a lot of these crazy things he could do. Don't be afraid, William warned one last time before he began to walk away. Slowly he began to take off his clothes. Oh, that I know. I was really scared the first time I saw him. The second time, too, but now I'm not scared anymore. I really like him. Emily had misunderstood, and she began to try to stop William. William, who was taking off his pants, almost fell when he heard what she was saying. Relax, it's not that. He spoke as he threw his pants aside. Look, pay attention, he warned. She began to wander her gaze over William's naked body. And then he began to grow larger and turn into a Lycan form. The young lady's eyes opened, and her delicate little mouth opened in surprise. She screamed. And then she began to run. She ran to William and hugged him. That's very nice. I always wanted to have a dog, but my dad never let me have one. She began to wander between her desire to have a dog and how cool William looked. She began to run her hand over his fur and disturbingly began to treat him like a pet. William froze to death without knowing what to do. It was true that his Lycan form was beautiful and even majestic, but it was frightening too. His confidence in his image took a blow. With a deeper voice coming from his Lycan form, however, that you could tell it was William, he asked. Aren't you afraid? He asked a little confused. She looked at him in her celestial blue eyes that were enveloped by a dark black, where it was supposed to be white. It was a frightening sight, but it was still beautiful, and a smile manifested on her lips. Afraid of you? Of course not, she answered promptly. She was really amazed by this revelation, but it was so cool. He was so cute. I'm glad you're not afraid. Now I have to tell you something else, he said as he tried to push her away to get back to her normal shape. No, stay that way. No matter what you wanted to say, stay that way. Emily agitatedly tried to stick to William. She'd really liked the Lycan form. She kept passing her hand on William. Okay, he surrendered to her. I can. This form of mine is called the Lycan way, and I can pass it on to others. William began to explain about the Lycans. I want, please give me that skill. I'll do anything. I'll do that dirty thing you asked for. Emily was excited about the possibility of becoming a Lycan. It was something that made William feel happy. He sighed in relief. Answer me. I really do that. Emily was trying to negotiate with him. Even if she didn't need those things, he'd quietly generate only hidden problems. Relax, I told you this. Not only did you want to know more about me, but I wanted to give you this ability. William replied in a way that comforted her. I love you. You're very nice, the best. She began to jump up and hugged William tightly. But before I do, I need to count the problems of being able to turn. Lycan is not just a skill. It's also a race, and it has some peculiarities. Just as wolves need to feed on prey, those prey may be animals, but the main one would be humans. William began to tell the pros and cons of being a Lycan, but in the end Emily accepted. She was a little upset that she couldn't turn into a big wolf like William, as she had said, but she was extremely pleased she could have claws and more strength, agility and improve her senses, vision, hearing. The specific details that made her want to become a Lycan. William didn't know the reasons, but he could guess some. The fact that most frightened her was the food, but William softened and reassured her by telling her the means they use, said that there was no need to hunt them, but there were beings that deserved to be hunted, and that the main problem for not hunting would be that a Lycan gets angry, more angry and would need to hunt and eat animal meat very often. In the end she accepted to be transformed into an elder. But he couldn't transform her today. The ritual for that is more complicated than normal, and tonight there would be the conquest of Lorith. After those battles he would prepare the ritual for her to become a Lycan. William began to comfort her. She wanted very much to transform. William was happy about it. Things were much better than the way he thought they would be. He was making a storm out of a glass of water. This is a magical world after all. Emily had insisted on participating in the nightly operation, but William struggled to convince her that he couldn't. She became agitated, but decided to wait. Even if concern dominated her for a while, she believed that nothing bad would happen to William. With a hug and a gentle kiss goodbye, he left. He was going to meet his soldiers. The night had come, the smell of blood would be strong. Cheese had been in charge of most of the Lycans. They would use guerrilla attacks and try to frighten the soldiers by attacking them from the flanks, doing their best to draw attention to their activity. Even if it was a guerrilla attack, they would show themselves enough to draw attention to their soldado enemies as much as possible. Then the second group of Lycans commanded by Derek would infiltrate the mansion and attempt to assassinate the leaders. William would participate in Chee's early operations, but if things turned out the best way, he would move on and join Derek's infiltration group. The place where they were going to attack this time was special. It was the biggest power center in the region. It was a huge mansion that was barely called a castle. It was surrounded by a wall 3.5 meters high which had several guards keeping watch. Most of the guards stayed in lodgings that surrounded the protective wall from outside. With an alarm they would position themselves and then things would get complicated, so it was necessary to draw attention in one direction and for another to invade. It would be a way to maximize the benefits. It was not necessary to kill all the soldiers, perhaps a part of them could be recruited to form a human army for William. The soldiers who were bribed, when the invasion began, would retreat and hide, but before that, they would pass on as much disinformation as possible to the others. The soldiers who were without morals, for not receiving their wages for so long, probably gave up the fight or would fight unprepared. Anyway, the victory was the least that could be obtained that night. The focus of this operation was murder and occupation. After assassinating all the leaders and their heirs, the Lycans would occupy the places that could be used as a defense, and then in an operation with the soldiers who had been bribed, they would begin to isolate the city in a way to prevent any attempt at resistance. Those were the plans. Now it was time to execute it.